think there was a saying called cinch it up and strap it down, and I think that's applicable for tonight. Welcome on in to the Outlap F1 podcast. This is season 6, episode number 43. It's our 2024 Sao Paulo Don't Call It the Brazilian Grand Prix review show. And boy, we're going to have a lot to talk about. We've got a lot to uncover tonight. So if you're in for the long haul, welcome along. You've got Andy and I'm along with Cody tonight. It's been a long day. Let's just put it that way. I think from 4:30 a.m. local to 6:30 p.m. local was when we finally got all the championship points. I think this is even longer than Abu Dhabi 2021. That was the longest time that I know that I hadn't moved in my life trying to take in everything that happened. But this is right up there with it. I'm along with Cody tonight. How's it hanging, sir? And, just how's it hanging?
It was a long day of F1 after a long night. Andy was kind enough to host some poker last night, so we were both up until the early hours of the morning. And did you actually get up to watch qualifying?
My body woke me up, has this odd sense. My subconscious has done this throughout my life. I did not set an alarm. I was not actually going to be that kind of crazy, but I woke up at 4:25, which was right when it was coming on the air. And I was flipping through ESPN channels and I finally found it on ESPNU. And I'm like, oh, all right, here we go. So then all of a sudden it's shot of adrenaline. You're awake. I'm like, I got to get my timing screen set up. So I'm frantic. It would have been one of those epic things. If you actually had a security camera in my apartment, how crazily fast I got that set up. But yes, I did. And the sun was up by the time it was done. So we've been here trying to take all of this in. I actually live tweeted it. I have proof of that on that platform. So we're going to get into all of this in just a little bit. But if you have found our show, as always, welcome along. We're glad you're here. You can find us Twitter. We're there. That's where we put the vast majority of our stuff. Instagram, we put some stuff up there too. Discord, Reddit, and of course YouTube at Outlap F1 Podcast is the handle for all of that. If you enjoy what you are hearing and you like what you're seeing, or if you don't even like what you're seeing, but you like what you're hearing, that's the important part. Do us a solid and either smash that subscribe button on YouTube or leave us a like. Or if you're on your favorite podcasting app, a 5-star review on either Apple Podcast or Spotify would definitely help our little enterprise here come up a little bit better in search results and help us get our content to you that much quicker. You can email us, as always, chat now at outlapf1.com, or you can shoot us a DM if you have a question about anything related to F1. Outlap F1 Nation, who continues to support our show. Thank you so much to Dean Warwick, Yuri Dolchester, Paul Weaver, Quentin Warden, Kevin Kelly, Regan Stanzik, Timothy Brown, and of course, Jonathan Scott. And if you'd like to become a member of that hashtag Outlap F1 Nation and get your shout out at the beginning of every episode, if you want to monetarily support us, we would love it. $1, $5. What does that do? All goes into making the show better, purchasing some new equipment to keep us relevant, or updating the equipment we already have. It's kind of what you got to do in this business. So we would appreciate it if you'd like to do that. Last thing before we hop into all of this action from the weekend, the good folks at Manscaped continue to use our code OUTLAP. That's OUTLAP. What does that do? That gets you 20% off and free shipping from their great array of products. I can't believe I'm saying this. It's November. Christmas is coming. If you're interested in that line of products, use our code, get some money off. That's what it's there for. And as always, we're proud to bring that offer to you. All right, we shall keep you waiting no longer. Cody, headline of the day. Where are we going?
I really should have got a Harry Carey sound bit for this because I'm not going to be able to do it justice. But holy cow, what a roller coaster of a weekend this was. And it ended with my favorite driver out on top. Fantastic.
All right, very good. My headline is, I cannot remember a more roller coaster of a weekend. Just from start to finish, I think this weekend just had about everything you could have possibly looked for team orders, controversy, FIA decisions, race control stuff, weird procedures, guys spinning off, epic rain, epic drying, then more epic rain. If you're a fan of the sport, I think this about did it for you. And if you're not entertained by any of this, I don't know what else I can offer you at this point. Because hot damn, crazy weekend, and we're going to try to unpack it all in just a little bit. But the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go back all the way to Friday. Because Friday started the sprint qualifying when it was nice and dry before all of the strangeness started. And we're going to start with our sprint qualifying recap. And I actually have done the thing. Here we go. All right. So going out in P20, the Kick-Sauber of Zhao Guan Yu. P19, this gentleman did not have a great weekend. We're going to talk about him quite a bit. That was the Aston Martin of Lance Stroll. P18 was Yuki Tsunoda in the V-Carb. P17 was Esteban Ocon in the Alpine. Tough start to the weekend. It would get better for them. P16, Fernando Alonso. P15, Valtteri Bottas in the Kick-Sauber. Almost getting out of Q1. Look at that. P14, getting out of Q1. New local hero in Brazil. I think he's got a following, folks. That was Franco Calapinto. P13, not into Q3 again. Broken record time, Sergio Perez. Wow. P12, Nico Hulkenberg in the Haas. P11, the other wow of the sprint qualifying session, Lewis Hamilton in the Mercedes. P10, somebody who we did not expect to have to call his name, but it happened because Kevin Magnussen misses the weekend with an illness, Oliver Behrman in the Haas. But he did not set a lap time in Q3, so he finishes 10th. P9, Alex Albon. P8, Liam Lawson, trying to impress the powers that be at Red Bull. P7, Pierre Gasly in the Alpine. There's some of that good Alpine form. That was a harbinger of things to come. P6, George Russell. P5, Carlos Sainz. P4 was Max Verstappen. P3, Charles Leclerc. And it was a good start to the weekend for my squad. P2, Lando Norris in the McLaren. And P1, Oscar Piastri in the other McLaren with a 108.899. Smashing the track record. Our lap times were bad. Right.
Yeah, we were so bad on the lap times. I was cringing when I saw them going around doing in the 1 minute nines, and I was like, oh no.
In the practice session, they were ahead of us in the practice session. I looked up and I went, well, we kind of thought it would rain, and it's bright and sunny out. And well, anyway, the track surface proved to be a big story throughout the course of the weekend. We will have to talk about that as well. But Cody, big takeaways from the sprint shootout.
So definitely McLaren looking very strong in the sprint qualifying, locking out the front row. Oscar Piastri, the one getting pole. And I figured when I saw this happening, I'm like, okay, well, they're going to, do whatever they can to let Lando take the win in the sprint if it pans out that way. To maximize points. Max Verstappen only made it up to 4th position, so had a little bit of work to do if he was going to limit that damage. Perez ended up being out in Q2. He was trying to go around to start another flying lap, and he couldn't make it around in time, so he just didn't even get another time in. But I think the big highlight is that Kevin Magnussen was out due to illness. They called in Oliver Behrman to sub in for him, and he's really turning out to be something of a super sub because he made it all the way to Q3. He did get in for the practice session, so he did have something going into the weekend here, but still coming into the weekend when you're not really expecting to, and being thrust into it and making it to Q3, beating out people like Lewis Hamilton, Nico Hulkenberg, Fernando Alonso. Like, he's really performing very well.
Got the call at 6:30 a.m. from Io Kodamatsu. Tells him, get your butt to the circuit because you're going in. We thought at the beginning of the weekend it might just be a one-day thing for Ollie Behrman, which would have meant that he would have done the sprint shootout and the sprint race. However, it turned out to be the whole rest of the weekend. So Kevin Magnussen, as a couple of drivers. I mean, we talked about Fernando Alonso having some, intestinal ailments earlier in the weekend. Kevin Magnussen had food poisoning, and just I think at the end of the time, Ollie Behrman's going to be in that seat anyway, and I think Haas kind of just said, you know what, we might as well just let him have unfiltered weekend, and let's see what he does. And at this point, he was doing quite well. He did not set a Q3 lap time because I think he spun out, and I think that's what caused him to not set a Q3 time. But those first two times were really good. At one point, I know he was like P3 in the practice session, so he came out of the box ready, willing, raring to go, and showing very well for Haas early. In terms of the front of the grid or the championship picture at this point, first blood, I would say, to the McLarens at this point. And Oscar Piastri, who I thought did an amazing job, who set that Q3 pole time on a second run. And this was Friday. This was the day. It was very hot, new track surface, very dark. So the track temperature was very, very high. And what he ended up doing was, and both McLarens did it, Piastri was able to capitalize it on his second attempt. Lando necessarily couldn't. Piastri goes out and did a double cool through the pit lane, and then they also made a bit of a front wing adjustment. And he goes out and actually the only one to, I think, improve on a second run of the soft tire in the sprint shootout Q3 session, and pips Lando by just a couple hundredths there. So well done, Oscar. Certainly on it in the beginning there for sure. All right, so we took a little break, we re-racked, and we came back for the sprint on Saturday. And the sprint had the following. As I cue up this, here we go. All right, so not classified with a DNF due to, I think it was a gearbox failure, actually, at the end of the day. That was Nico Hülkenberg in the Haas. P19, Lance Stroll in the Aston Martin, more pain for them. P18, Fernando Alonso in the other Aston Martin. Ouch. P17, Zhao Guan Yu. P16, Valtteri Bottas. You know you're having a bad weekend when the Kick Saubers beat you in a race. P15 was Yuki Tsunoda. P14, Ollie Behrman. P13 was Esteban Ocon. P12, Franco Colapinto. P11 was Lewis Hamilton. And P10 was Alex Albon. P9 ended up being Liam Lawson, and your points finishers from 8-1 in the sprint. P8, Sergio Perez, getting a solitary point on the board for him. P7, Pierre Gasly, more points scored for Alpine. Keep that in mind as we keep going. P6, George Russell in the Mercedes. P5, Carlos Sainz in the Ferrari. P4, Max Verstappen in the Red Bull. P3 was Charles Leclerc in the Ferrari. P2, Oscar Piastri in the McLaren. Flip-flopping around from qualifying, P1, Lando Norris takes the sprint, doing, at this point, what he needed to do to try to keep the championship alive. All right, we have lots to talk about for a short race of 24 laps that went only about a half an hour. There's a lot in here. Wow. Cody, what you got?
All right, so I guess we have to tip our caps here to McLaren for pretty much being in control of the sprint. Oscar Piastri leads off the line. Lando Norris hold on to second, and they're running 1-2 right away. And to his credit, Oscar Piastri was in a position to win the sprint, but I think we all figured, and apparently they even had a discussion beforehand, that when the situation allowed, Lando Norris would take the lead in the sprint to maximize the points that he could gain on Max Verstappen. Now, as we saw during the race, those top four, Lando, Piastri, Leclerc, and Verstappen, are staying pretty closely tightly packed together. And McLaren kept putting off doing the switch. They didn't do it right away. They kept putting off the switch because they figured that Leclerc and Max were following too close to Piastri and Norris to let them do that switch cleanly, and they didn't want to sacrifice additional positions if they could help it. So they kept putting it off. A little bit into the sprint, Max does get by Charles Leclerc, makes it up to that P3 spot. And then we get to
then it gets weird.
Yes,
Then it gets weird. So all of a sudden we see a shot back in the pack, Nico Hulkenberg, and we see the ominous blue smoke. The ominous blue smoke of, either engine or gearbox or something doesn't look right on that car. And Nico Hulkenberg pulls off to the side. And he's in a relative safe spot, but he is somewhat still in the firing line. And double yellow flags come out, which is the correct protocol at that moment. But you couldn't tell, at least, whether or not because he was kind of he was also going down a hill. So you couldn't tell whether he was stopped and he was truly done, or if he was somehow finding a gear and could maybe get going again. And then eventually he does stop, and he's up against a wall, and it's clear and obvious to anybody if you have a set of eyeballs, that car is going to have to get moved. And someone is going to have to come and move the car. He's unable to do it himself. He's now starting the whole procedure of taking his belts off, getting up and out of the car. Meanwhile, it's just double yellow flags for a crazy amount of time. In fact, the whole field goes by once, which I thought we've learned our lesson from the Jules Bianchi thing. And go research that. Don't watch the video, but go research that if you want to figure out what that is. It was one of the hardest moments that I've ever had watching an F1 race. But I thought we learned our lesson from that, and apparently we hadn't. And then they, instead of putting out a full safety car, because to me that's what should have been the call, should have been full safety car. Sprints over, 2 laps to go, full safety car. Maybe it ends under safety car, maybe it doesn't. But we get a virtual safety car, which, okay, fine. But between the time that Hulkenberg stopped and got out, I think in real time it was something like 40 seconds. That's an insanely long amount of time. I've talked about this before. Why are you struggling to make a decision when it's obvious? And I don't know if it was the actual marshals running out to grab the car that finally prompted race control to throw the VSC. But for whatever reason, they go around 2 times. One time, I know, with Hulkenberg out of the car, and finally through the VSC.
Yeah, it was.
So, yeah,
it was crazy.
Weird.
Too long for the virtual safety car, because the yellow flags for him going off the track, and he was not that far off the track either. Yellow flags come out on lap 21, and Norris is coming around to almost start lap 23 by the time the virtual safety car comes out. Now, so there's the safety grounds of this, that yes, they're going by him under just yellow flags at a point where he is already out of the car, which is definitely dangerous. Something else that was an effect of this is, I see Hulkenberg go off the track, and I'm thinking, oh man, this is going to be a safety car, or a virtual safety car at least. It might go until, depending on how things go, it might go until the end of the sprint. McLaren might have shot themselves in the foot by waiting so long to switch the drivers, because they might possibly be stuck with Oscar Piastri winning this now, and Max Verstappen in third. And the double yellows drag on for so long that eventually McLaren pulls the trigger and say, okay, switch now. And they do manage to get the switch done long after those yellows started. And I don't think it had anything to do with letting them get the switch or anything like that. It just kind of paints that picture a little bit, but it still kind of seemed like bullshit. On top of that, Max Verstappen apparently had an infringement on the delta he's supposed to maintain under the virtual safety car. I can't remember if he was going too fast or too slow. I think it was too slow.
No,
at one point.
It was too fast on the delta as the VSC was ending.
Okay. And that probably was because they did go back to green briefly on the last lap, and he was trying to set himself up to pass Oscar Piastri. So he probably, in shrinking that gap, probably went too fast on the delta. He did not get past Piastri anyway. Piastri shut the door on him. But that did end up giving Max Verstappen a 5-second penalty, which dropped him back behind Charles Leclerc for the results. So kind of a double whammy for Max Verstappen here. The yellows are out long enough for McLaren to do the switch. They do the switch right before the virtual safety car comes out, and then he loses a position due to the penalty.
Yeah, I mean, the part with the 5-second penalty, I thought he actually kind of self-corrected because he does get very close to Piastri. Now, it's letter of the law, the rules are the rules, and we've all had this the last 3 weeks of learning that the rules are the rules and this is how we're going to go, and that's fine. Letter of the law, it's an infringement. It is. But I also thought after he does drop back a bit, actually, when they actually do start racing again, and I thought he reestablished enough of a gap. He doesn't end up passing Piastri. Had he pulled the move off, it's I think then a much more open and shut case at that point. But it is, the delta is not anything, it's measurable. At least of all the stuff that happened, this was the one thing that I would say that was measurable and kind of open and shut. And so, he gets 5 seconds, he goes behind there. Lando picks up net 3 points at this point of the weekend. And I think at this point it was 44 points, the delta. For me as a McLaren fan, I'm honest to God, at this point, I was a little more focused on the constructors than I was Lando's thing. So it wouldn't have bothered me if they had pulled the switch off or if they really hadn't. I got it. Like, I understood it. I was surprised they waited. It didn't make sense to me to wait because there was at one point, I think he gets like Lawrence is 2.5 seconds in front of Leclerc. And I'm like, I almost said, do it now, do it now, do it now, do it. And they kept waiting. And it's just a common theme with them. They're scared of screwing up. And that's just how they're going about this. And I get it when it's a constructor's thing. And if you botch it and you somehow crash both cars out, there's Leclerc going to pick up 8 points. Now it's 21 points. And, at this point, Sainz was, it would be even more. It would have been under 20 points in the constructors, and you have a whole lot of calamity to deal with. So I got it. But at the same time, you got to trust the guys that you have on the track in order to pull the move off. And Oscar did it just fine. And as soon as the call came in, no drama happened once the call came. Just make the damn call. And, and you don't have any of that problem. And the other thing was, it looked like Lando would have probably pulled away and they would have gotten the delta and they would have helped kept Oscar in DRS, which is what Oscar was doing for Lando early in the sprint anyway. So just a whole lot of almost a major problem. Luckily, it turns out, I guess they get kind of a get out of jail free with the way the VSC went. But I didn't agree with the VSC taking as long as it was, and I'm not thrilled with the Verstappen penalty, but I get it. Like, I get it. Letter of the law, the delta's the delta, you got to respect it. And Max was trying to do, like, if he times it a half second later, it's probably an amazing move.
Yep.
But he didn't.
It would have been kosher, but it just wasn't quite right.
Right. So, all right. So this ends the dry portion of the discussion points, because in the 3 hours between the sprint and the qualifying session, God showed up. And God brought with him buckets and buckets and buckets of rain. And all you have to do is Google Interlagos circuit this weekend, and you will see pictures of the buckets of rain. Harbingers back to 2015 Austin for me, where I learned that I had parts on me that could get wet that I never knew ever could get wet. That's what I think of every time of, taking solace under the grandstands and the qualifying session that wasn't, and rescuing people in the park. I'm sure all this happened to people there. I'm sure all of this happened. And we actually never got the qualifying to happen on Saturday. It was so wet. They did not ever deem it safe to go. Combination of a few things. One, there was lots of standing water. Even though there were certain points where the rain would let up, there was a lot of puddling. It's a brand new track surface, so all the water is sitting on top. They had diamond ground some river channels to help, but this was so much rain in such a short amount of time that just buried the circuit. There really wasn't anything you could do. So after about 2 hours of standing around trying to figure out whether or not we could get qualifying in, they finally make the decision to suspend for Saturday, and now we're going to have qualifying on Sunday. There was lots of discussion in the interim because, and here's another thing, when you write rules, you want to think things through. Why we didn't have a ironclad, this is how we set the grid if the main qualifying gets rained out, especially in light of Spa 2021, is kind of amazing. But we did it. We did it again. We found another hole in the rules where nobody knew. People were saying it was the P1 session. Some people were saying it was the sprint qualifying session. Some people were saying it was the sprint race that should set the grid. You know what it actually turned out to be? None of the above. The stewards get to pick whatever classification they want because there's nothing in the rules that codified this. OMG. My goodness. But we did it again. But what we found out was they set the time for 7:30 a.m. and then they actually did something that I did not expect them to do. They moved the start of the Grand Prix up 2 hours to try to get all of the running in, so we don't have a repeat of Spa 2021. So that meant for you and me a bright, early or dark morning at 4:30 a.m. to watch one of the longest and strangest qualifying sessions I have ever watched. We're going to recap it here. I don't know if we're going to get into all of the detail here, but we're going to try. So the main quali from this morning lined up as follows. All right. So going out in Q1 in the main quali, still wet, very much wet. The Zhao Guan Yu in the Kick Sauber. P19 was Nico Hulkenberg in the Haas. P18, he had crashes out of Q1. Franco Colapinto in the Williams. P17, the rain not doing so well for Ali Behrman in the Haas. He does not make it out of Q1, and he had a couple of spins himself. P16, here was the shocker of Q1, Lewis Hamilton in the Mercedes. Advancing through to Q2, but going no farther. P15 was Pierre Gasly. P14, Carlos Sainz. That was surprising. P13, Sergio Perez. Not so surprising. This one was. P12, Max Verstappen. We got to talk about him and how he got there. P11 was Valtteri Bottas. Kick Sauber almost makes Q3. Holy crap. Look at that. But the top 10 from 10 to 1, P10 was Lance Stroll. In the Aston Martin, P9, Fernando Alonso. After I think Aston Martin made a wholesale change to their setup, they finally looked like they dialed it in a little bit. P8 was Oscar Piastri. We got to talk about his adventure in Q3. P7, Alex Albon in the Williams. P6, Charles Leclerc in the Ferrari. P5, Liam Lawson in the V-Carb. P4, here comes the Alpine form. Esteban Ocon. Hi, how you doing? P3, Yuki Tsunoda in the V-Carb. 2 V-Carbs in the top 10. Look at this. P2, George Russell in the Mercedes with his teammate out in Q1. George Russell puts it on the front row. And P1, somehow, some way he got there. I kind of really can't believe it. He almost was out in Q1 himself. But that's Lando Norris in the McLaren, a 1:23.405, the qualifying pole time. All right. So a lot to get into in what was normally qualifying as an hour. This thing went almost 2. That's almost a full Grand Prix distance. The sun was up by the time this thing finally ended. Cody, big thoughts here.
So, unlike Andy, my body clock did not and will never wake me up at 4:30 in the morning. So my first reaction to this was waking up, stretching, checking my phone, and seeing the top 5 for qualifying and going, what the hell happened? Yuki Tsunoda's in 3rd, Esteban Ocon's in 4th, Liam Lawson's in 5th. It was definitely a mixed-up qualifying. We saw whopping 5 red flags during the session, which contributed to it taking so long. In Q1, we've got Colapinto going into the barriers, caused a red flag. Signs into the barriers in Q2 for another. Stroll, and we'll get to this one in a little bit more in a minute. Stroll goes into the barriers at the end of Q2 to effectively end the session. Alonso goes into the barriers in Q3, and then finally, Albon has quite a destructive accident in Q3, destroys his car, and it ended up, due to the nature of the qualifying happening on the same day, earlier in the day from the race, did not actually have enough time to fully repair Albon's car, and so he did not even start the Grand Prix, which was a little sad. Now, getting into the Max Verstappen bit. Max Verstappen's already got a 5-place grid penalty going into this Grand Prix because he took new engine components. I believe he took a new internal combustion engine and perhaps something else. I don't remember exactly, but it ends up resulting in a 5-place grid penalty for this. So he's already on the back foot. Remember that stroll into the barriers at the end of Q2 I mentioned? Well, that just so happened to occur during Max Verstappen's final qualifying lap, and he is then stuck, unable to finish his lap, and he is back in 12th position because of that. So ends up starting the Grand Prix in 17th. So he had a lot of work to do.
Yeah, we've seen this happen, in Baku with Norris, just when yellow flags come out and it's not your fault, it sucks. That's all I can really tell you. It's a risk. They had all made, I think, first runs. I think these were second runs, but the track was actually improving. It was slowly drying out. The rain for the minute, had subsided a bit. So we went from, I think, in Q1, almost 7 seconds of delta time between Q1, which actually was started on full wets, which, again, something you almost never see. It was so freaking wet, they actually brought out the full wet tire. Let's just put that there. But anyway, and they actually tried to use it. That's the other thing. It's not like they didn't have it. They actually had to use the damn thing. But, that all being said, yeah, I just think it was a matter of bad luck. I know Christian Horner was not happy about it. What race control did, which I think annoyed the Red Bull team, I think more than anybody, was because of where Stroll had gone off, it was, I think, in the first sector. So if you were already on a flyer, you could, in theory, finish your lap. I think it was turn 3 is where actually Stroll came to a stop. And so they had double yellows there. So if you were finishing a lap, they let everybody finish the lap before they threw the red flag because there was so little time on the clock. There was no way, even had they stopped it right when he crashed, I think it was like a minute 20. The whole time's a minute 23. So you're asking somebody to do an out lap and try to get around to come around. So they knew the session was done. It just caught out Red Bull and Max on that case. I'll light up race control for a couple things I already did in the sprint, but on this one, I didn't see it as a problem. But this session was like watching a roulette wheel because you didn't know who was going to go off and when. The timing screen's lighting up with yellow flags. Oscar Piastri, I think at one point did a complete 360 spin in one of his flying laps and kept going. Lando Norris could have and maybe should have been out in Q1 if not for the last gasp, and it wasn't even that good of a gasp. And all of a sudden I just literally said, he got out. Lando got out. I think that was my exact reaction to no one here because there was no one else awake with me. But yeah, I mean, it was very, very high tense qualifying session. And if you got a break like Lando did, he definitely then took it for all it was worth and put it on pole. So as the track was drying out, I thought it came more to the McLaren setup a little bit, at least for qualifying. But yeah, I mean, anybody anywhere could have been. You could have been at the front of the grid or the back of the grid. It was really a pick'em session.
Yeah, your guy Lando definitely benefited from the other side of luck because when he came out of Q1 in 15th, so just barely squeaking through, but he managed to turn that around and get pole. So it just goes to show you how things were changing constantly on track. Sometimes you had a good lap, sometimes you were slipping all over and going off. So it was just that kind of crazy session.
Yeah, crazy session indeed. All right. I feel like we should stop here simply because we've recorded enough. We're going to take a quick break. This race has a whole enough. I think it needs its own segment, to be honest with you. So we're going to take a quick break. We're going to re-rack really quick. I don't know if I'll even put any sound in between this. We're just going to stop this session and then go on to the next one. But come on back. We're going to get into the race, the Sunday running. It's going to be epic, so you won't want to miss it. So come on back.